Now we got our funnel in place. We'll go ahead and start pouring some oil in. And you go ahead and do this for, this truck takes 6 quarts, so that's what we're going to put in. And let that sit for a minute. Drain the rest of that out. We open up our next pack. And you probably can't hear it, but I can. I can hear the oil draining back down into the oil pan right now. That was good. Set that up here. Start pouring the next one. Another good reason to let your oil cool down, although it's not a very common thing, but especially in colder temperatures and whatnot, say your oil's been sitting out overnight or something like that and it's nice and cold, and you go out and warm your car up in the morning and shut it off, there is some research that says that you can possibly crack the block or whatever, the heads, whatever, from introducing cold fluid to the hot block and it cooling down too fast or whatever. I've never seen it happen. I've read a couple horror stories, but I don't know. It's the internet, so it is serious business. And if you see, it's got that nice little thing there. We'll go ahead and finish dumping that one in. Let it sit and drain. You'll notice my little twisty tie job there. The pin came out and dealership wanted like 12 bucks for a little metal pin. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, it's this little pin right here. That's all it is. This right here locks the headlight in place. I want 12 bucks for that. I don't feel like paying 12 bucks for a pin. Piece of clothes wire will do it just fine. Now, the last little bit that we've got to do on here is to put the seafoam into the intake, which is a little tricky with some engines. On the traditional engine, traditional motor, you've got your brake booster system right here. Well, on these trucks, they have a hydro booster, which is, if you can see down here, coming off the power steering pump, you've got a line that travels up into here, up into the reservoir. And what that does, goes to this little thing up in here, into your master cylinder, and basically it provides you with extra braking forces when you need it. Not all vehicles have it, some do, some don't, but basically you don't have to run a vacuum line off the engine in order to power your power brakes. You have a fluid pressure line coming from the power steering system. Which means that we need to find a different route to pour our seafoam into the intake. And yes, I said into the intake, so keep pouring this stuff pouring the oil in real quick. And we'll go from there. And I shouldn't have to tell you, but don't just throw your oil bottles in the trash. Recycle them. You see here I've got the bottles left over from the last couple projects I've done. Between the Ford and the 78 that's sitting behind it. Changed the oil like crazy. Plus I've got a few other little bottles of stuff up here. Extra brake fluid, power steering fluid, just generic stuff. That's for my brother-in-law's car. But all these bottles will end up going down to the recycling center. I just haven't had a chance to take them all down there. Oh, and the car's sitting there. She's all pretty with the fire extinguisher on her because she likes to run on fire. Okay, last bottle of oil. Go ahead and take this one out. And pour it on in. And while that's draining that last little bit, we can get ready for the next part. Alright, we're out here to do the last little bit of the seafoam process. Well, to demonstrate the last little bit of the seafoam process on Camaros and most other cars outside of some larger GM trucks and possibly some other brands. For your brake system, you've got a master cylinder, which, you know, the big flat can thing that sits right behind here, your brake booster and everything sits behind the master cylinder for the brake system. On this truck and on certain other ones, you have this nice little hydro boost system, and what that does is, as opposed to having a vacuum line coming from the intake somewhere coming over here to the brake booster, you've got this hydro booster actuator right here, which runs off, I don't know if you can see it right here, this line coming from the power steering system, comes on up here and then feeds into your brake system. What that does, that gives you basically a more controlled braking system, especially for some of these larger vehicles and everything. Gives you a little bit more clamping pressure and whatnot, as opposed to a regular vacuum driven brake system. And unfortunately, I got to looking on here, my only other real vacuum line on this engine is right here for the positive crankcase ventilation system. And unfortunately, that little port is plugged right now. I pulled this line off earlier, ran the engine and everything, and I'm not drawing a vacuum on this whatsoever, which probably means that obviously my crankcase ventilation system isn't working properly. Now, for the rest of you, the way you would do the rest of the seafoam process is you take your nice little filter and you pull your brake line, your vacuum line, that goes to the intake manifold. And obviously I'm just going to pretend like I've got one here. You would pull that off the brake side, off the master cylinder, off the that thing, brake booster. You would take your funnel and you'd put it into that line, fire up the engine, and the engine idle is going to be a little bit different than what it normally is, just because obviously you've now got a fresh, free vacuum leak going to your engine. What you'll do with that last half a can of seafoam is, while the engine's running, you slowly just drip it into the funnel so the engine can suck it in and get it soaked up inside the cylinders and everything, and clean off that last little bit of gunk and grime inside your engine. And you remember the can itself is a 16-ounce can. We poured half of that in the crankcase, which leaves us with 8 ounces left. So you want to pour 2/3 of that remaining 8 ounces, and I know you don't want to do math, but just think about it. 2/3 whatever's left, you just slowly sip it in there. Once you get down to about 2/3 left, and you can do half, whatever you want to do, you pour it all in real quick and basically flood the engine. If the engine doesn't shut off, turn it off immediately. Just key advice right there. If flooding it like this is demonstrating doesn't kill it, shut it off immediately. And then once we're done with that, what we'll do is we'll let it sit, and you can go out, and if you want, one of Seafoam's other products that I really like is their Deep Creep, and all it is seafoam in an aerosol style can. And what you would do with that is you'd pull off your intake intake tube assembly and everything off the throttle body. Pull that off, open up the throttle blades, and on a computer controlled vehicle and everything, you might have to manually push it open, you might have to turn the key to on, hold it open, whatever. And with tradition style that actually have a linkage and everything, you just hold it open with one hand and spray the Deep Creep into the intake manifold. Just kind of circle it around there for 5, 15, 20 seconds, whatever you can get. Just get it in there and let it soak in and let it sit. Finish all that up, button up your vacuum line. Button up your vacuum line. Trust me, you do not want to try this and try stopping without power brakes. It sucks. Ask me how I know. And like I said, let it sit for about 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. Button up all your intake. Make sure everything's buttoned up. Remember, we've already got the oil filled up and everything. And then basically, once you've got it all buttoned up, close the hood, fire it up, and depending on how dirty your engine is will depend on how much smoke you get coming out. Dirtier your engine, the more smoke, more buildup, and everything's going to be in there. It's going to be burning off from the seafoam process. Less smoke, obviously, you got a clean engine. Now, one thing I will say with, newer, brand new cars and whatnot, like some of you guys out there with your Camaros and everything, you're at 20,000 miles for some of you. Some of you guys haven't even hit 5,000. This isn't something you necessarily would even need to or even want to do on a real new car. Like this truck's got a little over 100,000 miles on it, so obviously I just got the thing here a month and a half, 2 months ago, so I'm doing it on this. With newer cars, at 20,000 you might want to. One thing I do as far as my vehicles are, especially after the first seafoam, every 5,000 miles I put another can in the gas tank just to help keep things clean. I only do the full oil system about every 10 to every 15,000 miles, or basically every 3 oil changes, depends on how it works out for me. And my sprinklers just came on, but other than that, we did the whole treatment, everything, and now we'll be driving up to North Carolina this weekend and seeing where our fuel economy sits at, and we'll see you then.